Welcome to Brew Talk. In this episode, we're talking brew theory. And what about brew theory, you're probably thinking? Yeast, of course, mate. You can't ferment stuff without yeast. Now, yeast comes in different styles, different containers. Yeast can come in big tubs, 60 grams or bigger. Yeast can come in sachets, usually 5 grams. Then you go to the more specialist stuff. Some yeast is used for certain things, or special strains of yeast which give you different tolerances. I'll go into that in detail. Like this, for instance, it's a specialist yeast. This is a yeast designed to ferment up to 22% ABV. Yeah. Normal yeast, like this for instance, will ferment up to 15%, maybe 16%. That's it. Brewer's yeast usually tops off about 15%. You never get any higher than that. The average brew of ale is the strongest you can probably get is at 12% volume. Now, but for yeast, you're thinking, what is yeast? Yeast are little single cell organisms. Yeah. They're little single cell organisms which love to feed on sugar. Be it starch sugar, granulated sugar, anything. Usually yeast feeds on unprocessed, the better. Unrefined raw sugar gives you a better product. But if you're using granulated sugar, yeah, I'll eat it. Molasses, brown sugar, whatever you want to use, yeah, they'll eat it. Hell, even fructose, glucose, anything, sugar, they'll eat it. That's yeast. Yeast ain't fussy. But for yeast to be their happiest, you need to prepare. Because some yeast are rather ridiculous. Because they'll have preferred temperatures. Yeah. Some yeast like it when it's cold. Like the bottom feeding yeast used in lager. They like to be cold. They get hot, they die off. Yeah. Bloody annoying. Or you get a top feeding yeast used in ale. If they get too cold, they stop. Yeah. That's the thing, you see. Then you get like champagne yeast or cider yeast. Well, they're basically the same thing, really. If they get too hot, they make really nasty drink. If they get too cold, they stop. Yeah. And also, the thing that yeast is, a single cell organism is, you can make your yeast stronger. Yeah. Use some of this stuff. Hope the camera picks it up. It's called yeast nutrient. Yeah. Yeast nutrient. Yeast nutrients strengthens the walls of the cells of the yeast part of the yeast cells. Yeah. So they mature faster, they multiply faster. The attenuation is much stronger. They generally make much tastier booze. But then again, if you don't have yeast nutrient, you can make your own. Yeah. You just need some raisins and a blender. Blitz it up, throw it in your brew. Simples. But now there's a couple of things about yeast which is a continuous thing that you should know. Yeast do not like UV rays. Do not expose them to the sunlight. They don't like it. You've got to keep them at an ideal temperature. Yeah. Like in England, for instance, we use Celsius. So I keep my yeast between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius. Yeah. Fahrenheit, yeah. See if I've got a comparison here. Let's have a look. Bloody hell. Yeah, you're looking about. Alright, cool. It's about between 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah. So it's 50. Hold on, let me make sure I get my mouse right here. Yep. It's between 55 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So, a rule of thumb is, if you're using Celsius, you're between 16 and 24. No hotter, no cooler. You want to keep them at that continuous temperature. Alright? Put them in the airing cupboard, put them in a warm room, you know, insulate them. There's a lot of options you can do to keep things warm or cool, depends on the situation and season. But if you're using Fahrenheit, yeah, you don't want to go any lower than 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah. And no higher than 65 or 70. Keep it in the nice room temperatures. Nice room temperature. That's what you're looking for. Don't let them cook them and don't let them get cold, but nice room temperature. Your rule of thumb is if you're comfy, your yeast is comfy. Alright? Now, I talked about yeast nutrient, yeast themselves. There's many strains of yeast. Yeah, there's tons of strains. So I'll let you do your own homework on that. If you want a certain strength of booze, do your homework of what yeast can hit that ABV you're acquiring. But a normal brewer, yeah. If you just make cider, whatever, use champagne yeast or young super compound yeast. Yeah. But leave it too long, it'll turn to wine. So you have to stop the fermentation on purpose by cold crashing. But I'll talk about that in the next video. The fermentation video. Yeah. Yeast sachets themselves are good. Dried yeast are lovely. With dried yeast you can choose to make a starter, where you start the yeast off, you rehydrate them, let them get bubbling and multiplying, get the attenuation effects happening early. Or you can just pitch them straight into your brew. Pitching means basically adding your yeast into your stuff on the surface and leaving it for a couple of hours. And the yeast will start to multiply, feed and breed. Before you know it, you'll be fermenting maybe 8 to 48 hours, depends on what's going on. Unfortunately, there's no guarantees, unfortunately. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes quicker. Depends on how acidic and a few other factors. So, let's break it down. The don'ts. Don't expose them to UV light. Yeah. When you store yeast, you keep them in the fridge. Yeah. See these tubs? Lives in my fridge. Specialist yeast lives in my fridge. Normal brewing sachet bale yeast lives in my fridge. Yeast nutrient, well, this one's empty unfortunately, but it's yeast nutrient. It's empty. But that would be in my fridge. Yeah. Keep them out of the sun. When you're not using it, refrigerate it. And when you are fermenting, keep them at room temperature. Not let them get hot, not let them get too cold. Yeah. Because remember, when you add yeast is a bacteria. It's a fungal bacteria. Yeah. When you make alcohol, you're deliberately infecting it with bacteria. Fact. So, you have to sterilize everything. But luckily for you, that's going to be in the fermentation video. Oh yeah. So, now the do's. Just to make sure people are getting this, because I don't want no one thinking, hold on a second here. Do keep them at room temperature when you're fermenting. When you got a batch on, you've pitched your yeast or you made a starter and you've mixed that in with your brew. Keep it room temperature. Keep it out of the light. UV rays, they hurt a brew. If you ever put a beer outside and left it in the sun and it's got nasty and skunky tasting, now you know. UV rays and beer don't match. And before you pitch your yeast, you take your trusty hydrometer and you take an OG. Yeah. Before you pitch your yeast, you add yeast of any form to your brew. You used to look at your brew log, and you take an OG, an original gravity. Otherwise, you're going to regret it because you're not sure when it's good to bottle. Yeah. For experience, you won't need a brew log, but I'm assuming you guys are a lot of beginners here, so use a brew log, okay? So, hope it's helped clear things up. And the next thing is sanitation and fermentation. Booyah. Have a nice evening, night, or morning. I'll talk to you guys later. Brew Talk, this is Brew Theory. Aye, ta-ra.